Alrighty, so in this video we are going to add NPCs to our game. And if you remember from our last video, there's going to be two NPCs in our game. One is the innkeeper, who will provide a bit of information to the player, and the other is going to be the guard, who will eventually have a quest for the player that the player will have to give them back a lost item to win the game. But for now, we're just going to add the NPCs and create a talk command. So this is going to look very similar to how we did items in our game. We're basically going to add an array to our rooms for NPCs. NPCs are just going to have a talk command, and they'll just be resources. So with that, let's get moving. First thing we want to do, just like we did before, I'm going to create a new folder in our file system, and I'll call this NPCs. Whoops. I'll keep it all lowercase, so it looks kind of weird, but just to match the naming convention. And I'm going to add a new script here, and I'll call this npc.gd. And let's open that up. This is going to extend from resource, just like our items do. Again, the reason for this is that we actually never need to instantiate this in our game. We just really need it to be a data source. It doesn't actually have to be in our scene tree. And so this will just be a little bit lighter, but you absolutely could make it a scene or a node. That's totally fine. So you can do whatever you want to do. I'm going to stick to resource just because it's a little bit easier. And so we're going to need to add some properties here. Again, similar to item, we'll need to have an NPC name, and we're going to need two pieces of dialogue. So I'll say export, and we'll say string, and this will be var NPC name, and we'll just default this to NPC name. They're also going to need an export string, and I'm going to add you might remember this multi-line hint here. What this does is it tells the editor when in your export variable, when you can edit it in the inspector over here, it'll make it a multi-line text area, so you can make it more than just one single line. And we'll call this initial dialogue. And we might change the name later, but my thought here is that there will be an initial dialogue that all NPCs will say, and then certain NPCs that have a quest or have an ask of the player, when the ask is fulfilled, there will be a post-quest dialogue. Or, you can call it dialogue 2, whatever you want. But for now, we'll just do initial dialogue. And we'll add another line that we'll do for the same thing, and we'll just call post quest dialogue. Again, we don't have to do the post quest dialogue yet. We're not going to actually implement our give command, but we'll just have it here just in case. And so this is just going to make it that we have NPCs. We can create new instances of that resource, add it to a room, and the player can talk to them. So now that we have our basic NPC resource, we need to actually go to our room and add, just like items, an array for our NPCs. Now, you could argue that maybe you'll only ever have one NPC in a room, so you might not make it an array. That's totally fine. It is up to you, but I will make them an array. And I'll put it, I think I want NPCs to appear before items when our room printout happens, so I'm going to also put them before items in our code. So I'll say NPCs. This, again, will also be an array. We will make it empty by default. And so what we can do then is, just like we have all of these functions in our descriptions, get room description, get item description, I'm going to add a new function, and I'm going to call this function get NPC description. And this is just going to, again, return a string, and it's just going to be a printout of all the NPCs the player can talk to. Okay, so let's just, before we implement this, I'll just type pass for now. Let's do just a quick talk about how we want to make this happen. So currently, we are always, if you come up to our get full description method here, we are always printing out our room description, our item description, and our exit description. Even if there's no items, we'll just say no items to pick up, but we won't, we'll always print it out. And I think I've become convinced that for things like our items and NPCs, where most rooms might not have them to interact with, rather than saying no items, no NPCs, is actually better to just not print anything out at all. And that way there will be less text cluttering up what the player sees. So I think we always want to do the get room description. We always want to do the get exit description, because those are just key parts of orienting the player. But for items and NPCs, I think what we actually want to do is not even print anything out if there's nothing there. So we'll make that change in pieces. The first thing I want to do is build up our full description array piece by piece, rather than doing all three of these right in the same line of code or lines of code. So what I'm going to do is actually create a new variable. I'm going to call this full description. Woo, that was bad. Full description string. And this will, as you can guess, just be a join of our full description array. And I'm actually going to return our full description string. So this join call right here, get rid of that. So we're going to set our full description string equal to full description, and then we'll do the dot join with a new line. And so we're basically doing exactly what we're doing now, but we're going to join on a separate line so we can build up our full description piece by piece. So we always want our get exit description to be in our array. So I'm going to say full description dot append, and this will be get exit description. So I'm going to cut that out, get rid of that, and just append this afterward to our array. But it's not going to be there by default. And I'll append it afterward to our array, but what we do in between isn't always going to be the same. So let me also get rid of our get item description line here. And I'm actually going to change our pool string array builder to just be one line. So we're going to start with a pool string array that has just one thing, the get room description, which I think is good because we always want it there. And now what we can do is say variable item description, and we're going to say get item description. But what we want to do here, I think, is change our item description so that if there's no items to pick up, it can just return an empty string. So I'm just going to change that to be the empty string here, and we can say this. So we'll still have variable item description equals get item description, but now we can say if item description does not equal the empty string. So if there is something there, we can say full description dot append item description. So it's going to be the room description, and then it'll be our item description if and only if there's actually something to display there, and then we'll always append our get exit description at the end. And so again, this is still going to look the exact same for any room that has an item, but now if there is no item, nothing will get printed out. And the reason I wanted to do this is because I want to do the same thing for our NPCs. So we added an NPCs array up above, and what we're going to do, similar to items, is I'll just actually copy the code from the first two lines of our get item description, and we'll say if npcs.size equals 0, we'll return the empty string. Else what we'll do is exact same thing that we're doing for items. Let me just copy lines 60 through 63, and we'll print it down here and just change items to NPCs for NPC in, you guessed it, NPCs. And then instead of item string, it's NPC. Actually, let's just call it NPC string, not plural. And then NPC dot NPC name. And you'll remember that that's the name we set in our NPC script. It's NPC name. So we've got NPC name. And then let's change this to say NPCs. And then NPC string. Now, again, we could make this a little less just straightforward in your face. You could make this more contextual. Instead of just saying, here are the NPCs, and then listing them, you could say, there is an innkeeper. There is also a... so again, with items and NPCs, you could make it in your game just a little bit nicer, a little bit more contextual, and less just kind of hitting the player over the head with it. But for now, this is good, and we're still making improvements, I think, from what we had before. So now we have our get NPC description function. Let's actually call this in our get full description. And remember, I said I want this to come before our items. I think NPCs are usually... just anytime you have a character, it's probably a little bit more important or whatever. It just makes sense to me to put them first, but you can put them after items if you want. But I'll just say NPC description, get NPC description, and same thing here. If NPC description does not equal the empty string, because if it's empty, we don't want to print anything. So if it's not empty, we will append it to our full description, NPC description. Okay, so now our full description is only going to conditionally include our item and NPC descriptions. So this is really good. I think this is a good first step towards making our game better. And now what we can do is actually start adding NPCs to our game. Okay, so in order to do this, let's head back over to our room manager. And one other change I want to make, again, part of this whole series has been asking, why would we use Godot to make a text adventure game when we could use maybe other simpler engines? And there are some reasons not to, and a lot of reasons to use Godot. One of those is to make as much use of the editor as we can and the visual ways that we can edit things that the editor provides. And one way we didn't really do that earlier is with our items. So for example, we're doing all of our key creation and initialization in here, but we made our keys resources. We made our items resources, and resources are serialized by default in Godot. And also you can edit them and open them in the editor by default, which is a really nice feature. So I actually want to change our items to be items that we create as resources ahead of time by actually creating a TRES file that we then edit and bring into our game. And the reason I want to do that is, again, we're going to do the same thing with our NPCs. So if I open up our items folder in the system down on the bottom left here, you'll notice that if I go to new resource, remember that item is a resource. The item script that we made, it extends resource, and Godot is really smart about realizing that and adding it as something that you can create from the new resource menu like you see here. So if you type item, you'll see items show up like this. So if I hit create, it'll ask us to create a new resource that is going to be of type item, and I'm going to call this a key, just key. And now you'll see that along with item.gd, which is just this class that we have here, this resource class, we actually have an item resource called key that uses the item script and has these default values. But what we can do is actually edit these in the editor. We can have a default key resource that we can just bring into our game. So we don't have to create our keys strictly from code anymore. We can actually edit their properties from the editor. So what I'm going to do is change our name here to be a key, because I think we're using the syntax of trying to say a key or the or whatever. So anytime in our game that we need a key, we can just actually create a new instance of this resource, specifically of our key resource, rather than creating a generic item and editing all this from code. So to see how that works, let's go back to our room manager. So what we can do is actually change these lines here. We don't have to give a key, or we don't have to initialize our key anymore, because we're doing this from within the editor. So we can get rid of this line, and I'll say variable key equals, we'll change this to be load, and we'll pass in the path to our key resource, which is going to be res, and then the double slashes, and then items / key.tres. Now, eventually, if you had a lot of items, you would want to make an item database somewhere that you didn't have to pass this path in every time. You could just grab it from some auto load or something that kept track of it. But for now, this is going to be a pretty simple solution. I'm actually going to get rid of this key line too, so that we can move it back down to where we're creating the key, which is down here on line 18. So in order to create a key, we just load in our key resource now. It's already predefined. All we have to do is just set where that key is meant to unlock. That's all we have to do. And so this is a little bit simpler. We have a pre-built template basically that we can instance keys, rather than just instancing an item and then having to turn it into what we want later on. We can actually get rid of this initialize function too, because the assumption now going forward is that, let's say we needed a potion, we would actually just create a potion resource and initialize that, or instance that, and just load that in, rather than having to create an item from within our room manager. So there are drawbacks and benefits to doing it this way. I think the benefits outweigh any of the drawbacks. Maybe you lose a little bit of flexibility from just doing it all in code, but using the editor makes life easier, especially in something like Godot, where it's very editor driven. There's a tight interplay between your scripts and the editor and the engine itself. So now that we've got this template of how we can create our own items, let's do the same thing for our NPCs. And you'll notice that in our item script, we gave our items a class name of item. We're going to have to do the same thing for our NPCs, because this is how Godot determines whether it should be picked up as something that you can instance from the new resource modal. So we'll say class name, and this, you guessed it, will be NPC. So what we can do now is I can click on our NPCs folder in our file system, right click and go to new resource. And now if I type NPC, you should see that we have an NPC that we can instance. So remember how we said we needed two NPCs. One was the innkeeper. So we'll do them first. So with the innkeeper, I'll double click on that, and you'll see on the right that we can now edit this, and I'll say the innkeeper. Actually, let's just say innkeeper for now. So the name will be innkeeper. This is going to be what the player types in order to actually interact with this NPC. And that reminds me, I think when I made the key resource earlier, I said a key. Yeah, let's make sure it's just key, because remember, we need to make sure that it's just one word that the player can type in. So they'll just type in key. And for our innkeeper, they'll just type in innkeeper. And then here, our innkeeper can give some helpful information that the user or the player will be able to see if they talk to our innkeeper. Now, again, just because this is a tutorial and I'm not trying to make a fully featured game, I won't put a lot of thought into this, but we can say something like, "Hi, traveler. if you want to win the game and, break the fourth wall a little bit here. So sorry about that. Please do something better in your game. So if you want to win the game, head north to the village gate and talk to the gatekeeper. Or I'll just say talk to the guard. I guess that's the name we'll give him. And there we go. Now we've given some initial dialogue to our innkeeper. We won't actually fill out the post-quest dialogue because we're not going to give our innkeeper a quest to do. We're just going to have this initial dialogue. Now that we've got that, let's add another NPC, and this is going to be our guard. So I'm just going to call him guard.tres. Double click on our guard, and again, we'll change the name to be guard. And so here's where we can actually give both an initial dialogue and a post-quest dialogue to display to the player. And we want to make sure our initial dialogue indicates to the player what they need to do to fill out to finish the quest for the guard. So again, breaking the fourth wall and doing something dumb. Let's make the dialogue something. You cannot pass. I seem to have lost my sword in the field to the west of the village, and until I recover it, nobody goes through. Don't ask how that makes sense. Just go find it. There you go. I promise I am actually a not awful writer. Literature was my major in college, but this is not meant to showcase the skills. So please do not use this as a judge of my writing ability. But so we've got a simple dialogue. It clearly tells the player, hey, you have to go. Here's where you have to go. Here's what you need to do. Find this item. Well, here's where it is. And until you recover it, nobody goes through. And a little bit of humor because every game needs a little bit of humor. So now that we have that, we can also add some post-quest dialogue. And in our case, getting out of the town is the win condition for our game. So we can say something like, you found it. I've never been so happy in my entire life. Please go through into the forest. I owe you a great debt. Okay, again, something stupid like that. But we've got 2 lines of dialogue now. And the best part is it's easy to edit in the editor. And let's say we wanted to have another guard later down. Well, we could just duplicate our guard resource and just change the dialogue. We can change all of it within the editor. It's way easier than trying to do it from code. And what you could actually do, and what you'd probably want to do if you had a bigger game, is you can make your NPCs and your items actually populate from a JSON file or a database or something outside of Godot. So if you made all of this in a JSON file, you could write a JSON file that had all of your NPCs and each one had its initial dialogue and post-quest dialogue. You don't have to use JSON. You could use even a text file or a CSV file, whatever you want. You could write a script that would run through that CSV or that JSON file and create new resources dynamically as your game runs based on the name and the dialogue they have. So you can do it whatever you want. We're just doing it in Godot because I want to showcase resource creation and how nice that is. But for a larger game, you'd want to probably use something outside of Godot to do it, even though doing it within Godot is very nice. And it's great that you have that ability here. But now that you're at least a little familiar with resources, it's easy to make them work for you in a way that works for your game. They're really easy to tailor and super nice. So now that we have our NPCs, let's actually add them to our game. So we can go back to our room manager to do that. And you see that we are adding items by using this add item script that we had down below, or this add item function. We don't have that for our NPCs yet. So if we go to our room, and you'll see we have add item and remove item, we can add a function here, and I'm just going to call it function add NPC. And he will never guess what code we're going to write here, but we're just going to pass in an NPC. And for now, it's totally okay for us to not have a remove NPC. I'm not going to remove NPCs from a room, but if you will do that, if you want NPCs that wander around in your game and have to change rooms, feel free to add a remove NPC function. We just won't do that. So simple enough, it'll be NPCs because this is the list that we created in our room. Each room has a list of NPCs here. Don't know why I added that space there. That'll annoy me. So we'll do NPCs.append NPC. Just like that, we've got an array of NPCs that we're going to add to. So now within our room manager, we can both create a new version or a new instance of our guard and our innkeeper and add them to the rooms that they're supposed to be in. So let's do that. The innkeeper needs to be inside of our in our inside, which is what I've called that scene. So what we'll do is say variable innkeeper, and this is going to be load. We're going to need res, the 2 slashes, and we'll do NPCs slash innkeeper.tres. And you'll notice we're going to have to start writing these paths in a lot of different places. So what we can actually do is create a helper function here, which I'll do right now. And we'll call this like function load, and we can say load item, and then we can just say item name, which will be a string. And what this will just do is it'll say return load res, our slashes, items, whoops, lowercase items, and then plus item name. And this is assuming that all of our items are going to be in our items folder, which is a good assumption, and it should be. And remember, it's not just enough to add our item, we also have to add the tres afterward. So we'll add another string at the end here, which will be .tres. So we're making just a simple, easy to use dynamic loading helper. We'll do the same thing for our NPCs. So I'll do, whoops, let me do this. I'll copy this function. We'll do load NPC, and then same thing. We'll do NPC name, change this items to NPC, change this to be NPC name. Oops. Oh, this needs to be NPC, sorry. Just trying to make sure I have this matched up to our file system. So we're loading an NPC at this in our NPCs folder with the given NPC name. Okay, so we've got our helpers now, which will make it a lot easier just to load in variables. So instead of saying load and passing the path in here for our key, I'll say load item, and I'll just pass in key. And remember, what this needs to do is match the name of our file. So because it's uppercase K on the key, we need to uppercase it here. Same with our NPCs. So we'll change our innkeeper to be load NPC, and I'll pass in innkeeper. There we go. And I'm going to copy this line and do the same thing by the gate for our guard. So here, this is going to be guard, and we'll change it to be guard. Now we can actually use the add NPC function that we just created in order to actually add these to our room. So after we connect the exits, I'll do gate.add NPC, and we'll add our guard. And same thing with our innkeeper. Here I'll do, actually, let's do this line right after we declare our NPC variable. So I'll do inside add NPC, and you guessed it, we will add our innkeeper. Oh yes, so now we have nice, easy to use helper functions for loading in items and NPCs. We've created an innkeeper and a guard in our game, and we've added them to our game itself. And so we don't actually have our talk command in yet, so we can't talk to them, but we can go through our game and make sure that they're actually appearing as they should be. So let's try that now. So if we run our game, let's go to the inn. So I'll head west, go up our path, go east to the door of the inn, and then go inside. You'll also notice here that the items line where it says no items to pick up isn't printing out anymore. So there's a little less text to parse through, so I think that's nice. So if I go inside, we'll see that we have an NPC. It's the innkeeper, which is great. We can't talk yet because talk is not a recognized command. But if I go south, you'll also see that our key item is still there and still appears when there is an item to pick up. So this looks really good. This is exactly what we want. Let's finish this video by adding our talk command. Okay, so in order to add that command, let's go to our command processor. And just like we've done before, in our match statement within our process command function, we will add a talk command. I'm going to do it right after use. You can put it wherever you'd like in this statement. And I'll say talk and then return talk. Again, our talk function does not exist yet, but we'll add it in just a second. And talk needs to have a second word, remember, because we have to talk to someone. We can't just talk in general. So we'll require or pass in our second word. So now let's add our talk function. Again, because I put it after use in our match statement, I'll actually put our talk function after the use function. So I'll say function talk. And again, make sure we have our second word passed in here, which is a string. And it will return a string just like all of our other commands that we have here. So first, just like use up here, you'll see we're saying if second word is empty, we're saying drop what? Well, we want to have a similar message here. If the player tries to talk without specifying who to talk to, we want to say talk to who? And this will just be a nice message to inform the player, hey, you have to pass in a second word. So now that we have that, we can actually print out the dialogue of our NPC. So we can say for NPC in current room.npcs. And remember, this is because we added our NPCs array to a room. So we can go through all the NPCs in our current room's NPC list. And we can say if NPC, and remember, we are storing the name of our NPC in a variable called NPC name. So we want to actually get that. So if NPC.npc name, and we want to do 2 lower on this because we want to make sure it's lowercase since we are lowercasing our second word up in process command. So if NPC name.2 lower equals second word. So if the name of the NPC matches what the player typed in, then we want to return. And here what we're going to return is that initial dialogue. Like I said, we'll get to the post-quest dialogue later on in a different video, but for now, we're just going to return npc.initial dialogue. And so just like that, we're going to print out the NPC's initial dialogue when the player talks to them. There's only one more thing we have to do, which is to add a failure case here. So if the player says talk to the president and there's no president in the room, we can say return just a little message telling the player that that person is not in this room. So we can say that person does not exist in this room. You can tailor that message however you want and say something else if you want, but I'll just do that for now. And okay, cool. Just like that, I think we've got everything we need to actually talk to our NPCs. So if I run our game, let's go to the inn. I'll go west, go path, go east, and now go inside the inn. And here we'll see our NPC of the innkeeper. So let's first try talking and say talk keeper. And I should see the error saying that that person doesn't exist here. So talk keeper, that person is not in the room. That's good. And if I just say talk, we should see that it says talk to who. Okay, so both of our failure cases are working just like we'd hope. That's amazing. And now let's say talk innkeeper. And if I do this, you'll see that the innkeeper says, hi traveler, if you want to win the game, head north to the village gate and talk to the guard. Man, that's really heavy-handed. I wonder who wrote that. But it works just like we would expect. This is really awesome. It would be even better if we maybe had something in front that says innkeeper says or something like that, just to indicate that it's speech coming from the innkeeper. That's another thing I want to do in a future video too, is just to have different colors to demarcate things that are said or demarcate items and NPCs, etc. But one thing we can do for now is to put something in front of the message here. We can also keep that in quotes. So what we can do is maybe first put the name of the NPC in front. So we can say npc.npc name, and then we can add that with a colon, a space, and then let's actually add quotes around our dialogue. So I'll do this. And so what I'm doing here is I'm giving the NPC's name, so it'll say innkeeper colon, so it'll kind of introduce that they're talking. And then I'm adding a quote around the dialogue. I have to do this backslash here to escape this quote character so it doesn't think I'm ending the string. It means that I'm inserting a literal quotation mark character into the string. And we'll do the same thing here at the end. I'll do our quotes to add a string and then do a backslash quote to add an actual literal quotation mark character to our string. And so what this is going to do is whenever an NPC talks, it's going to actually return the name of the NPC with a colon to just kind of indicate to the player that this is speech coming from the character. And then it'll actually surround that speech in quotes, which is pretty natural and should make it look a lot better. So now that we have that, let's run it and see if this is a version that we're happy with. Okay, so I fast forwarded to inside the inn with our innkeeper. And now if I say talk innkeeper, let's see what happens. Now it says innkeeper and a colon, so this kind of indicates that this is the innkeeper's response, and then the message is actually in quotes. So this is much better. It's immediately clear that this is speech from the innkeeper. It's not super easy to get confused with the commands or other text. And if we go outside and then go west and then go north to the gate, we can see that there's the guard, and if I say talk guard, we'll see the guard's text as well. can't pass, have lost my sword in the field of the west of the village, etc. So there you have it, everyone. We've added NPCs and the ability to talk to them, and soon we'll add actually filling out a request for them and make our output look better. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this has been a helpful video, and if it has, a like and subscribe to support the channel are much appreciated. We'd love to have you in our Discord server. The link to that is in the description below. And if you do find my work helpful, you can donate a coffee to me on Buy Me a Coffee. Link also in the description below. That helps me continue to make great free tutorials. Thanks so much, everyone. See you in the next video.